Okay, so there's likely to be a little bit of crossover here between some of the things that Chris had discussed and some of the things I've got in mind, but there'll be some other parts in it as well, so please bear with me. But what I'm here to talk to you today is how to get started with OSS, and really it's a beginner's guide to how to get started with OSS or open source software. So the first thing that you might be wondering is, who's this guy? Who am I? Who am I to come here and try and speak to you about contributing to open source? What gives me the credentials to do that? So in terms of who I am on GitHub, which is where most folks think about when they think about open source, I'm Get13 on GitHub. I'm quite prolific on GitHub in terms of the projects that I contribute to, the discussions that I get involved in, etc. So in terms of my contributions on GitHub, I joined the website in 2011. I've had over 24,000 contributions. I'm a member of 23 different GitHub organizations. I'm responsible for 42 NuGet packages across different products, and I'm responsible for 30 Chocolate packages. So some might say that I've got a problem, and I'll put my hand up and I say that I do absolutely have a problem in terms of the amount of time that I spend doing this stuff. But I do genuinely enjoy it. But the reason that I go through all of that stuff to illustrate what my credentials are is that literally none of that is important, okay? Anyone can contribute to open source, whether it's reporting a bug, whether it's getting involved in troubleshooting a problem and helping trying to diagnose something, whether it's writing some documentation, whether it's doing a bunch of code changes and submitting that back as a pull request, as Chris had described earlier in her talk. It absolutely can be anyone, and anyone can contribute to open source. And I want to make sure that everyone is everyone is happy with that, right? So let's dig in a little bit and say, well, what is open source? What is open source? What is OSS? So the kind of one of the strict definitions of it is open source software is software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. So what that means essentially is that I can walk up to a GitHub repository or a GitLab repository or an Azure DevOps repository, and I can look at the entire source code for a product. So whether it's something like VS Code, whether it's something like the Linux kernel, whether it's something closer to me, which is the Chocolate product, or whether it's the Cake CLI, I can walk up to that project. I can look at the source code, I can download it, I can compile it, I can run it. If I want to, I can then make contributions to it. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So some common examples of what open source is. I kind of mentioned some of them there, but I mean, there's when people think about open source, the kind of the obvious one is something like Linux. From a desktop application style of thing, you can look at things like OpenOffice. From a database perspective, there's things like MySQL or maybe newer MariaDB. And from a browser perspective, you can look at things like Firefox. And then from a kind of application development side of things, you can look at things like VS Code. So all of these are free, open source. You can go to them, you can download them, you can do all those things that I described. And it's completely free. It's free as in beer. You can use it. You can sometimes you can distribute it. You can make changes to it. If you wanted to, you could fork it and you could do your own things with it. But there's lots of different idiosyncrasies to how you would go into those things. So you kind of have to go in with a little bit of your eyes open when you start going down the path and contributing to a project. So as an individual, why should I care? Why should I care that open source is this thing and I can contribute to? What does it actually mean? So the first one I want to start with is that it is actually great fun. There are, Chrissy touched on it a little bit, where there's the dark side and there's the toxic contributors to projects, and there definitely is that aspect to it. But there is for the most part, it's great fun. I've been doing it since 2011. The thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to, but my first real contribution to open source was to the Chocolate project. That Chocolate project is now what helps pay my mortgage. I work full-time for Chocolate, which started out as an open source project. It now has a commercial arm to it, and that's what I do all day. I work on Chocolate, I contribute to Chocolate, and we help folks in their Windows automation journey. So it absolutely can be fun, and it can actually help you be your core source of income as well once you get into it more. So it's great fun. You will work with some amazing people. This is absolutely true. I have friends that I've met I've only ever known online. I've had the privilege of meeting some of them in real life as well. But you work with some amazing people, and you will learn from those people because no one knows everything. So, for example, the folks that I work with in the Cake team, there's a wide spread of knowledge in terms of C#, Windows automation, debugging things. There's a wealth of information that you can get and learn from these people. And likewise, you can bring your information and your expertise to those teams as well. So you will get to work with some amazing people as you get into some of these projects. And on that note, you will become a better developer. So if you are doing PowerShell, you're doing C#, you're doing F#, it's a great way of looking at other people's code, seeing how you can improve your own code, and by, like I say, even not directly contributing to a project in terms of providing code back to them, just by reading someone else's code. That's what I do a lot on GitHub, is literally just looking at repositories, seeing how they do things, seeing how their automation is set up, seeing what new C# constructs that they're using, etc. Through that, but you're able to learn rather than just having a textbook and trying to learn from the guided examples we have in that book. Looking at actual real-world code, I find is really useful in terms of becoming a better developer. The last one, it's a little bit of it is true. You can get some free stuff. As soon as you start saying that you've got an open source project or you're working on open source, there's a bunch of free stuff that you can get, whether that's in terms of hosted credits for things like Azure DevOps, whether that's licenses from things like Redgate or JetBrains. You can absolutely get a lot of free stuff. The obvious benefit for the people that are providing that is that you're using their tools, you're evangelizing the usage of those tools, etc. So you can get a lot of free stuff. But that's not my main goal in doing open source contributions, but you absolutely can have those free stuff coming down coming down to you as well. I'm just gonna read this comment. The number of times I've searched for stuff on GitHub with filters and languages filtered and find examples, not on Google. Yes, absolutely. The GitHub search is it's a great resource in terms of finding how someone's used a particular function. So in terms of Brett's use cases, if he wants to know how to use a specific PowerShell commandlet, PowerShell function, he might just search GitHub for, it's a terrible example, but it's the only one that's coming to mind, write information. You'd find out how people are using write information in terms of what they're using it for, how they're applying it, etc. It's a wealth of expertise at your fingertips that you can look at there. Let me get back to my slide deck here. There we go. So the format of this talk is really broken up onto the two sides of open source. There's the I'm a contributor to a project, I want to get started in a project. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is I'm a maintainer of a project. How do I start a project and how do I get contributors to my project? So we're going to start with I'm an individual and I want to make my first contribution to a project. So I'm really excited. I've heard about this open source thing. I want to get into it. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to write some code. I'm going to create an issue and I'm going to submit a bunch of stuff to this project and it's going to be great. So absolutely applaud people for wanting to do that. But I also say, well, let's just slow down there a little bit. It's great that you have that energy and you want to get involved, but there are some kind of, not roadblocks, but there are some things you need to think about before you start making that first contribution. Now, the first one is a little bit controversial, but we need to learn Git, right? Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily just Git at the command line, but as Chris spoke about in our last talk, learn the concepts of Git. Learn what the terminology is, learn what a branch is, learn what a fork is, learn what a clone is, learn how to do a commit, learn how to undo a commit. And if you want to use something like GitHub Desktop to do that, absolutely do that. What I do recommend to folks, though, is you're going to get to a point where there are certain things in Git that you're going to want to do and you're going to want to need to do that a user interface just isn't very good at doing. Things like an interactive rebase or a Git bisect or looking at some more detailed history of the repository. There are certain UI things that you just can't do. So I do encourage folks to go and learn Git at the command line. So if nothing else, when GitHub Desktop throws up a message saying, I can help you with that, which it did in the early days, you can go back to the command line and exercise that Git command line to do the operations that you need to do. So there's some resources on there. The one that I would call out, if you get a copy of these slides, that last YouTube video is amazing. It's all about a gentleman who is explaining how Git works, and he uses a kid's toy to build up the branches and the commits basically interactively as he's discussing what he's doing. It's a great video. I would encourage everyone to go and watch it. So learn Git. However you, whether you're a contributor or a maintainer of a project, Git is going to be pivotal. It used to be the case that there was kind of this war between Git and Mercurial in terms of the distributed version control system that folks wanted to use. I think it's safe to say that Git has won the war. So learn Git. You will reap the benefits from learning and understanding the concepts of Git. So once you've got that, you need to find a project that you like. Now, the reason I say that, in order to want to contribute, you're going to have to want to find a project that you're actually interested in. So that's why I started contributing to the Chocolate Project. At the time, I was working at a company, and we were looking to create virtual machines. So we wanted to have this virtual machine have the exact same software on it each time we spun the virtual machine up. So we were looking at Chocolatey to help provide the automation around getting those applications installed in there. So I found this Chocolatey project. I got involved creating issues, creating PRs. It was a great learning curve in terms of using the project. But what I found was, because I had an active interest in the project, I was able to contribute more because I was able to take the things that I was doing, use them directly within my job, and then come back to the project and help work with the direction of the project. So find the project that you like. Now, before you can start contributing to a project, and Chrissy did touch on this, a lot of projects have a contribution guidelines or a code of conduct that they might have. So GitHub does its very best to highlight those contribution guidelines, or the code of conducts when you first start trying to make your contributions to the project. Now, I would encourage you to read those. A number of times as a maintainer, people don't read the guidelines, they don't read the code of conduct, and we've had to push back. We've had to push back to say, look, you haven't created this issue correctly, or you haven't understood how we do things. So as a mark of respect to the maintainers of that project, as a contributor, you want to make sure that you've read how that project works, because every open source project will work in a slightly different way. So you're going to want to make sure that the one that you're looking at, because it's the one that you've decided is the project I'm interested in, you want to make sure that you understand how that project functions. So you're then in a better position to say, well, okay, this project happens to always create an issue first because they want to discuss what you're wanting to work on. And then if you get buy-in for that issue, then you can go and start work on code, and then you can create a PR for it. Because the last thing that a maintainer wants to have to do is to say, we can't accept that. Now, as a maintainer, I've had to do that a couple of times. We've been in a situation where someone has spent a lot of effort, both in terms of time, knowledge, figuring things out. They've submitted a PR, and we've had to say, well, we actually don't want that. So we thank you for your contributions, but we're not accepting it. And it's horrible to have to do that. But if that person had then read the contribution guides, the guideline that we have for one of the projects that I work on, it clearly states, before doing any work and before risking having something not accepted, let's create an issue and discuss it. That allows us to have an open dialogue then just to say, it's a great idea, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about the consequences of doing this? And then after that dialogue, we're then in a much better position to say, well, actually, let's not spend any time in doing that because we don't think it's a good idea. Apologies about that. I seem to have lost my slides. Give me one second. Seriously. There we go. Okay, so that's the contribution guidelines side of thing. The other part of it is, are you allowed to contribute to this project? There's a couple of aspects to an open source project that you have to be familiar with in terms of knowing that you are allowed to contribute. So one of those might be the license agreement. If you work in a company, you might not be allowed to contribute to a project if it's under a particular license. That's in terms of the contribution that you're making is code that you're contributing to the project, or does your company allow you to do that? And that's kind of where the CLA, or the contributor license agreement, comes into play, because some projects will actually ask you to sign that contribution license agreement to make sure that you're not beholden to any rules or regulations within your employer that prevent you from being able to contribute to that project. So it's an important thing, again, because again, you don't want to spend a lot of time and effort doing something to then contribute it, to then have that knocked back because you can't sign that contributor license agreement. So it's, again, important thing to look at the project and understand the rules, the regulations, to make you aware of what can happen. Chris is saying, I'm very interested in the CLA. GitHub and automated it too. Yes, there's a couple of things, and I've got a couple of links in the next half of the talk that goes into that in a little bit more detail. So I touched on this, but I know it's very exciting. Like I said, I've done it myself. You're looking at a project, you immediately see where there's a need to do something, and you think, oh, this will be a great idea. And I'm going to go off and I'm going to create some code. I'm going to run it in a dev container like Brett told me about. I'm going to write some code. I'm going to spend the whole night doing it. And I'm going to contribute it. And then the maintainers then going to say, well, we can't have that. And there's plenty of reasons why a maintainer might say that to you as a contributor. For example, the maintenance burden that a new feature brings with it. Yes, you might have the best intentions, but you're probably not the person that's going to maintain that long term. So as a maintainer of a project, they might say, well, it's an edge case. I don't want to bring this into my project because it doesn't make any sense for me to continue maintaining this. So create an issue first. Go up to GitHub, create an issue, document what you want to do, why you want to do it, or why there's a bug. Write that issue, get feedback from one of the maintainers to say, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. I think it's a good idea. This is what you might want to think about. Have that dialogue and then do the work. It saves both you and the maintainer a lot of work and potential heartache as well. So definitely create that issue first. Then you want to create a pull request. So once you've, the pull request, Chris talked us through exactly how you do that. So as an example, we go over here. This is an example of a pull request that I created. So this is me making a contribution into the Chocolatey Chocolate project. The reason I bring this up is because one of the things that we're starting to do on the Chocolatey Chocolate project is we're using both issue templates and pull request templates. The idea here is that, yes, I've got this thing that I want to contribute. So if I look at the code changes here, or on the left-hand side with Octotree, I've made these changes, I've added tests, I've done work, but the code itself doesn't actually tell me exactly what it is I'm trying to do or the technicalities of what I'm trying to do. And that's where the pull request template that we're starting to use comes into play. I minimize this, if I make this a little bit smaller, hopefully you can see a little bit more. What this is, we're asking for what is the motivation and the context behind this pull request. And you might be asked to provide this to the project so that the maintainers of that project can understand what it is exactly that you're trying to do. And one of the things that we're starting to stress within the pull request templates that we're starting to use is, how have you as a contributor tested this? Because I want to be able to know as a maintainer that you've thought about the edge cases, that you've thought about exactly what it is that you're trying to do. And then I, as a maintainer, can read through those tests, run them myself, make sure that they work as we expect them to. And then on top of that, I can then suggest, well, have you thought about this? Because you haven't mentioned it in your testing, but have you thought about this edge case? And then obviously we want to have a link back to the original issue, because the original issue will have additional details. It's like, what is it you're wanting to do? This one didn't particularly use the issue template that we're starting to use, but it's only something that we're starting to come into. Not enforcing is a strong word, but we are starting to encourage folks to fill out the issue template. It would have had further details about the whys, in the context of what it is we're trying to achieve. But having all those things in place means, or having all those things, filling it out with the issue templates, adhering to all the contribution guidelines and the code of conduct, it's got your pull request has a much better chance of getting pulled in, because you've looked at all the instructions that project has provided, and you've submitted your pull request with that in mind. Okay. So we go back to here, and there we go. So that was you've now made the pull request. The next part of making a pull request is be patient, right? Now, Chrissy touched on this a little bit. The project maintainers come and go. People's lives get in the way. They might have had a baby. They might have had to go for a medical procedure. They might have been watching the football because the World Cup's on. There's lots of things that can prevent a pull request being, from the time from a pull request being opened to actually being actioned by one of the maintainers of a project. It can be a long time, right? So a prime example of that, as I mentioned it earlier, but my first contribution into an open source project was to the Chocolatey Choco project. I did this work where I created a new helper function for creating a generic shortcut when I install a chocolate package. So I went into a lot of work. I did the work that was needed at the time. Rob, Fervent Coder, came online, said this is a good idea. Rich Siegel then said, oh, the other ideas exactly, blah, 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 blah. So I opened this on January 2013, and somewhere down here around March 2014, so over a year later, it got closed, because that PR had kind of sat and not degraded, that's the wrong word, but it sat there for over a year. It wasn't worked on, and it got to the point where it didn't actually make sense to use that pull request anymore, but rather the project had moved on. So what we did is we merged it in under a different PR. So I'm explaining that because all that excitement, I want to contribute, I've done the work, I've created the issue, I've created the pull request. There's no guarantee that PR is going to be merged the next day, right? So like I said, that was over a year before that functionality landed in the master branch to then be able to be shipped as part of the chocolate product. So don't get disheartened. Things can take a little while. It's an open source project, and there's no SLAs, there's no service level agreements about how quickly a project will be how quickly a pull request will be merged in. So be patient. There's no harm in following up with a maintainer and say, are you still interested in this? But don't follow up every day, every week. Just be patient, okay? Can't stress that one enough. The other one related to that, so be patient. Don't be a jerk, right? Yes, you might have gone to a lot of work. You might have been up all hours coding things and testing things out. But at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that your work will be accepted and it will be merged in. But if you start being a jerk about it and you start not being kind, not being polite, maybe going against the code of conduct that's documented on the repository for the project that you're working on, then all that's going to do is put that maintainer's back up. So it's going to reduce the chances of your PR being merged in. So understand that people's lives get in the way. Most open source projects don't have any sort of fiscal, what's the word I'm looking for? Most open source contributions don't have any fiscal benefit to the maintainers of that project. So they're not getting paid for their work in the same way that you didn't get paid to make the contribution. But there's nothing to say that there's any sort of timescale around the PR. But be patient, don't be a jerk about things, and you will hopefully get to the point where those contributions that you're making will be accepted. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, from the other side of things, so let's say, I love what Chris said earlier, where she kind of had this dream of having, she wanted to have her own project and be able to write her own book about it and do all these things around an open source contribution, an open source community. And there absolutely, there is a buzz that you get from that. So let's say, let's switch this up and say, I want to start my own open source project. How can I get started? First of all, I would say absolutely, you should do it, right? There's, as I mentioned before, in terms of the benefits from an open source project and getting involved in open source, there's lots of reasons to do it. And there's lots of good reasons to get involved. You're meeting and working with great people. You potentially get some free stuff, and you will learn a lot. So absolutely, go ahead and do it. But there are some things you need to think about. So the first one being, well, I need to pick a license for my project. And there is this great website, I think Chrissy did mention it, but there's a website you can go to where you can actually step through a wizard in terms of what open source license makes sense for you. So whether it's a fully unrestricted one like MIT, or whether it's there's more aspects to it in terms of sharing and contributing back. This website will talk you through all of that. So it gives you lots of help in terms of walking you through, well, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to do, how permissive do you want it to be. You need to establish what that license is. Not early. Chrissy mentioned that she was able to switch the license, and that's great. But there are potential ramifications, because we've had to do that on the Chocolate GUI project. In order to make a license change, you actually have to get buy-in from all the people that signed or were contributed under the previous license. So it is something to think about before you start that project, because it can be difficult to change it after the fact as well. Typically, for me, as an open source maintainer myself, I typically put all my stuff under MIT. On the Chocolate project, we typically have Apache 2 licenses. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to speak to exactly the benefits of each one, but I would encourage you to go and look at this website, read through it, and have a think about what you're going to create the project under before you get started. Oh, so that's an interesting one. So Chris is saying that she actually lost one of the major contributors to DBA tools due to the desire to switch the license, and that's absolutely, I'm not going to go as far as to say it's got, there are internal debates that you can have about all these things, because it is a hotly debated topic. So put some time into it and get it right for you as a project before you start doing that work. The next thing is, and it kind of speaks to, you want to encourage people to be able to contribute to your project and grow a community around your project, is have a good README. So as a couple of examples, the cake project that I work on, the README is the first thing that a person walking up to your project is going to see. It's first and foremost on the GitHub website when they go to your repository. So you want to have that to have all of the information that you want in terms of your project, whether it's what CI systems you're using, whether it's what code coverage metrics that are, where the documentation lives, how do I contribute to it, how can I reach out to ask questions, how can I get in touch, what's the license that we're using. All of these things should be first and foremost on your README, so that it's the first thing that people see, and that's where they can find the first pieces of information. So I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time on that README, building it up to have all the information that you want your contributors to see, and don't just kind of leave it with the default, which is just the project name in there. That's not what you want. As another example, on the chocolate repository, again, this one uses a table of contents, so it's a slightly different structure, but we build up all the information so that folks can easily link to it. They can find out where they can chat to us, how they can support us, information about what it is, how they get involved, all that information. Again, that's prime information that you want all of your contributors to be able to see, so that they get that information and it's available in one place. Let's go back to here. So we've picked our project, we know what we're building, we've built up the license, we've got that defined, we've got a README now, then we've got to look at our contribution guidelines. So this is how we want to be able to inform people that how they can get involved. Now, if you create that under GitHub, GitHub will surface those when a contributor tries to make so if I go to an example, if I go over to here and I go to issues, and I go to new issue, and if you're a new contributor to a project, then when you create an issue, it's over here. You'll see the contributing guidelines pop up here. You'll see that there's a code of conduct, there's a security policy. GitHub also highlights them down under here as well. So when you're looking at an issue or looking to create an issue, GitHub tries to bring that to that person's attention to say that this project has put all of these documents in place to encourage you to read them and understand them before you make that issue. The other way that we do it within Cake is because, as Chrissy mentioned, DBA Tools has their own website. Cake has its own website as well. So if those folks are not aware of what GitHub is, we bring that into the project as well. So anyone browsing our website will see that same code of contribution guidelines and code of conduct to understand how this project operates. So it's a little bit of duplication, but the way that we've actually been able to do it is we actually have that information in one place, and we the build that we have puts it into two places. So we've got the contribution guides, and then the other one is it's related, but it's the code of conduct. An example of that is the contributor covenant code of conduct. It's a lot of one. So a lot of people have spent a lot of time building up this code of conduct, and we, as a couple of open source projects that I work on, we've simply adopted it. So what this is saying is these are the rules that we want this project to adhere to. So if there's any examples of people being bullied or people being mistreated, we can reference people to the code of conduct to say that this is not how we're not going to accept this within our project. So that could come down to people being disrespectful in issues or pull requests. It could be in the chat systems. A prime example of the one that Chrissy mentioned earlier, where someone came on and said, I can't remember the words that you used, but he came on basically inferring that something not very nice about Chrissy, and that sort of stuff needs to get shut down quite quickly. In the code of conduct, having that clearly stated on your project is the best way of making sure that everyone's on the same page. And if you don't have a code of conduct, then you're in a position, well, I as an individual think this is a terrible idea, but there's no way of really enforcing that unless it's written into your code of conduct so you can point people at it. So I'd encourage you to set that up if you haven't got that on your project. The other part of that is the contributor license agreement. Now, it's a reasonably hotly debated topic in the sense that some people like them, some people don't like them. I personally don't have a problem with them. The license agreement is basically a contract between you as a maintainer and you as someone as a contributor. And basically what it says is that these are the rules around your contributions that you make to a project. So the one that I'm linking to here is the CLA bot that's provided by the .NET Foundation. We get that the Cake project is a member of the .NET Foundation, and as a result of that, we get access to their CLA bot. So what that means is that anytime a person makes a contribution to the Cake project in terms of a PR, a code change, the CLA bot will check to see whether that person has or has not signed our contributor license agreement. And if they haven't, they will be asked within that PR to say, can you go and sign it? And then once they've signed it, the CLA bot then picks it up and says, this person's now signed that agreement. And this is where you can get into final details of does your employer allow you to make these things? Because the last thing that we would want to do is accept a contribution from someone and then for them to turn around and say, well, actually, I did this on mine whilst I was under the employment of this company. This company doesn't want me to contribute to open source. I'm going to have to take that contribution out. So the contributor license agreement is one that will dictate and stipulate these are the things that you have to abide by before you can make that contribution. And then by signing that, you're saying you understood what those rules and regulations were. And then me as a project maintainer can accept that under the knowledge that, well, you've accepted those contributions. So seeing it in action, I mentioned it, but as an example here, so we've got this open PR into the Kik repository. So this contributor, I'm going to go with Nickel, provided this. The CLA bot then popped up to say, well, actually, this person's already signed it. So we get a notification in here from the CLA bot that says the CLA requirements have been met. So it's there in line in the PR, but we also see it further down within the checks as well. So within GitHub, you can specify what the requirements of any PR are. And in this one, for example, there's down at the bottom here, there is a licensed CLA check that ensures that that person making that contribution has signed that CLA, and if it hadn't been done, this would be a red X indicating that we wouldn't be able to merge this PR until that was done. Unless there was a reason to do that, we could use administrative overrides to accept that PR. But typically, we won't accept a PR unless all of these checks pass. So that's how the Cake project does it. And like I say, we've got access to the CLA bot that's under the .NET Foundation. But there is an open source alternative that you can make use of on your project, and that is cla-assistant.io. So it works in a very similar way, but you as a project maintainer would go onto this site, you'd sign up, you would add your project into the system, and then get registered as a GitHub app, and then it will sit and monitor your pull requests that are coming into your project in a very similar way to how the .NET Foundation one does. And then you've got that traceability in terms of who's contributing to your project and whether they are allowed to contribute into it as well. So back to the slides. I touched on this a little bit, but I would encourage you to use issue and pull request templates in your projects. So what I'm talking about here is that both GitHub and GitLab, if you're using it, have the concept of pull requests and issue templates. So what this allows you to do, so again, this is us looking at Cake, is that rather than just having a free-form text box that you can allow people to type things directly into, what we can do is we can specify a specific template that you want to use. So in this one, we've set up a template for I'm reporting a bug, or I want to report a security vulnerability, or I want to ask for help or share ideas. So what we're encouraging people to do is if they've got a question or they're maybe not quite sure about how Cake works, we don't necessarily want them to raise an issue about that, because issues for us are more about there's a bug or there's a feature request or there's something that we need to do as a project. So we don't necessarily want them to appear, those questions to appear as issues. So rather what we say is, let's have a discussion about it. So discussions are a reasonably new feature within GitHub, but it's quite Stack Overflow in its style. It's more of a question and answer based system. So we encourage people to create a discussion about a question that they have rather than an issue. They can then select from a list of categories that they have here. And the benefit of that then is that if we look at one of these ones, for example, this one's been marked as answered because this question came up. Nils on the team came back and said, have you tried this? And then this person's then able to say, well, this solved my problem. It's been marked as solved. So that's the Stack Overflow side of things coming into play there. The benefit of that is the other people having the same issue, it's easier to find it in here because they can filter down by category, they can search on specific question types, etc. And the other part of it as well is that if during that discussion, something in here actually, well, this is a bug, someone asked a question because they weren't sure if it was a bug or not, you can then create an issue from the discussion. So you can always go from the discussion and create a specific issue to address the question that's come up. So there's a lot of stuff in there that helps with that. The other side of it is you want to do a bug report. So the bug report, what we've then got through, this again is a reasonably new thing within GitHub, but what we're using here is the templated version of an issue. So rather than having someone be able to just type things in and then maybe not provide all the information that we need, what we're using here is the forms element within a GitHub issue. So they can then just say, well, I've done this, or I've done this, or we're asking what specific version of Cake that they're using. We can provide a drop-down list. So rather than having them type things in, so this then allows us to have a much more or a better understanding of the system that they're running Cake on, because we're asking for the specific pieces of information. And these ones obviously are required fields. So if they don't provide us that information, then they can't raise that issue. So a number of times in the Cake project, someone has raised an issue, and then the first thing that we have to go back to them and say is, can you provide more information? This is what we need. The issues here allow those to be much more constrained in the information that we do need, and to the point that they can't submit that issue until that information is provided. So it's a great way of doing it. The way that that works is, I believe it's a YAML file. So if we go up here into GitHub, issue template, and then the bug report, we drill down into here and look at this. Then yeah, it's a YAML file where you can construct the body of that based on whether it's a checkbox, whether it's a drop-down list, etc., whether it's required, etc. So if you haven't played with that yet, go and take a look at it and get them set up on your projects. So that was the first example. The second example is from Chocolatey Choco again. So there's a few more things going on in here, but it's very similar. The one that I wanted to call out on this one was if you want to report a security vulnerability, then there is a specific way that GitHub will handle that by having a security.md file in your repository. So if when you do that, the issue creation will pick that up to encourage people to not directly create an issue that can potentially leak information about a security aspect that they're reporting. Let's do it correctly. So what's the word? Appropriate disclosure of the problem, so that we've got an opportunity to fix it before telling the whole wide world about it. So issue and pull request templates are definitely important to a project, and I would encourage people to take a look at those. Continuous integration is important. Continuous integration is the building of your code to make sure that it continues to work. The Cake project has got a good example of this, and you might say this is a little bit ridiculous, but anytime we have a PR, we build Cake with Cake on 14, 15 different CI systems. The reason that we do that is because Cake interacts with a number of different CI systems and tries to do things. If it's being built on TeamCity, Cake will do certain things. If it's being built on Azure DevOps, Cake will do certain things. So we want to make sure that building Cake with Cake on those CI systems works the way that we expect it to. The important thing here is that when you accept a contribution from someone, you want to make sure that the code that they're providing continues for your project to work. So on your CI system, you might do the build, you might run some unit tests or integration tests. You might actually deploy that out to somewhere to ensure that it installs correctly. But by having that CI or continuous integration or continuous deployment pipeline set up, it's really simple within GitHub Actions to set that up. So everything's in one place. But the benefit there is that as a contributor to a project, I can quite quickly see if I've done something that broke the build. As a maintainer, you can see that all of the checks and tests and everything that you want have been are continuing to pass, that nothing's been broken. If someone's provided new tests into your project, then you see those being executed in the build pipeline. So it's an important thing to have set up. And I'm completely biased about this, but I work on an open source project called Cake, which is a continuous or is a build automation tool. So if you wanted to use that for your continuous integration pipeline, then by all means use it, because again, I personally think it's great. The next part of being a maintainer is you want to encourage a community. This goes directly to what Chrissy was saying in her previous talk. You want to encourage community, you want to foster adoption of your projects, and you want to accept contributions back. and you want to be able to find a team. The concept of an open source maintainer burnout is a real thing. People get disheartened. People need to walk away from projects. They haven't got the same time that they had before. So if you can find a team, then you can have the benefit of their experiences, their help, and then when you're not able to help maintain a project, you've got a team behind you that can help do that for you instead. So the example of the Cake project, we have something like 9 or 10 people that are now part of the core team. So if I'm busy and I'm not able to contribute to Cake as much as I want to, then there are other folks that can step in and help out. So by building that, encouraging that community and fostering people's excitement and understanding of your project, make them a maintainer, bring them onto the team. And if they've shown a high level of issue creation or documentation contributions, or they've fixed a bunch of bugs and they've created some new features, then ask if they want to come into the team. Give them the access rights to the GitHub repository. Make them aware of how you want to do things, how you want things to be done. That's something that you as a maintainer probably want to have documented, so that when you bring on a new maintainer, you've got all that information that you can point to someone to say, this is how we do things. If you've got any questions, obviously ask, but this is the information that you need in order to be an effective maintainer of this project. Within the Cake project, when we do that, we have internally in a private repository, we say, here's an issue for bringing on a new maintainer. So we have, here's all the things that they need access to. We need to give them access to LastPass, they need to give access to GitHub, they need to have access to all these CI/CD platforms. And then we have this is how you become a maintainer. So that's something I would encourage you having to think about that as you're going into the project, because it's not easy being a one-person maintainer of a project. So I would encourage you to have those people that you can fall back on. The other part of it, and this is the exact same thing for contributing to a project, but it's for different reasons. Be patient. So you've let's imagine the situation, you create this brand new amazing project. You think it's amazing. You do all this work, you put it up onto GitHub, and then nothing. Nobody's interested in it. Nobody's starting the project. Nobody's using it. But you don't know that. People might be using it, but just maybe not feeding back to you about it. So be patient. Things don't happen overnight. Wait and see what kind of feedback that you get, and don't expect that things are just going to immediately take off. And the other one that's really important as a maintainer of a project, don't be a jerk. If someone makes a contribution where they haven't read the contribution guidelines and they've just made they maybe reformatted all your code because their machine does things in a different way and they put up a PR, then you could be a jerk about it and just quickly close that PR and say, not interested. But if you take the time, I'll take a little bit of time, explain to that person that's making that contribution, this is not the way that you do things, then you could turn that kind of initial PR into a person who becomes a core contributor to your project. So don't be a jerk about things. People might be doing GitHub for the first time. So take that time to foster that person, encourage them to be part of your community. And like I say, it is a positive environment is out there. Contributing to open source project is immensely gratifying. So, but there is that dark side, and that dark side can be as a result of maybe a quick reaction from someone saying, this is not the way I do things, and that leads to people going backwards and forwards. Just take a minute, take a breath, speak to that person as my mom always said, speak to that person as you would like to be spoken to, and 9 times out of 10, it'll all work out in the end. In terms of, I think I'm coming up to my time, but in terms of ways of contributing, there's a bunch of places out there. We're here talking about Hacktoberfest. Hacktoberfest being the yearly project yearly event where you can contribute to open source projects and get a t-shirt out of it. There's another one, it's a similar one. It's going to be running again this year, I believe, which is 24 pull requests. 24 pull requests it's a Christmas-based event. The idea is that you'd submit a pull request for every day in December. There's no t-shirt at the end of this one, but you do get bragging rights to say that you have completed 24 pull requests within December. Up for grabs, code triage, and first timers only. They're all about I'm a first-time contributor to a project or to open source in general. How can I get started? So they're trying to basically catalog issues together that maybe have been stamped specifically for this is a good first-time contribution for someone getting started in a project. So there's some links there to go off and take a look at. And the other one is, to finish off, is do you have any questions? Because I'm at the end of my slides, pretty much on time, I think. So if there's any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. If you want to contact me about anything, that are my details. What I do say is you're more likely to get a response from me on Twitter, because there's a limited number of characters where you can ask a question, and there's a limited number of characters where I can respond to it, and you're more likely to get that response because of those limited characters. So reach out and get her Twitter, because I'm always there. And there are some resources at the end for other bits and pieces. So the slide deck will be available from the folks. If there's any questions or comments, now's the time.